I'm the editor-in-chief of IEEE Software, Forrest Scholl, and I'm here today talking with Ann Rose at the University of Maryland, who's going to tell us a bit about one of the very ambitious systems that she has, which is leveraging social networks to create a very nice service for users in the community. So Dr. Rose, thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Great. And so what I asked you to talk about today was the International Children's Digital Library. And so I thought maybe you could set the stage by giving us a little bit of background on the system and the work that you've done on it.
Absolutely. So the International Children's Digital Library, also referred to as ICDL, was launched actually back in November 2002, so almost a decade ago now. Exactly. Hard to believe we've been around that long. So we started as a research project with 3 years of funding, where our mission really was to create an online digital library of children's materials from around the world, with the idea that the literature from these different countries could help promote tolerance and understanding among children in different countries. So as we continued on, we realized that this wasn't a project that we just wanted to stop kind of at the research level. We actually have continued out. ICDL is now a nonprofit foundation that we have continued to try to keep this particular project running. We have currently in our library, in terms of some of the numbers, we have over 4,600 books. Those books range from old public domain books, maybe from as early as the 1500s, to books that were published within the last year or two. We target children ages 3 to 13. We have books in 61 different languages. Those languages include languages that you might come to mind, more common. Of course, we have books in English and French and Spanish, but we also have books in Shona and Sinhalese and Slovenian and Kinyarwanda, so languages that you may not have heard of. And those books are from 65 different countries. We also wouldn't be able to make a lot of these books available and or have as many languages available if it weren't for a pool of volunteers who also help us translate those books that we are given rights to translate. And currently we have over 4,000 active translators who volunteer their time to ICDL by helping translate our materials into different languages where that's possible.
Great. And I was going to say, one of the things that really struck me when we were having an email conversation ahead of time, you had mentioned that the volunteers are doing more stuff for you than you can even keep up with. And I thought, wow, what a unique problem that is to have.
It's a wonderful problem to have, and I think it's for probably a couple of reasons. So one, we have a really fantastic site that people are anxious to try to help to contribute to. So our translators, when I say we have these 4,000 translators, those translators are just people who are interested in children's literature. They may be a parent who's living in another country and wants to make sure materials are available for their child in a particular language. We have professional translators. We have educators. We have librarians, all sorts of people who have different reasons for being very passionate about the topic of children's literature, in particular in international children's digital or international literature. But one of the challenges that we face is that most of our libraries, since we're targeting children ages 3 to 13, we tend to have a lot of picture books. So when we translate a book, we have a couple issues. First of all, we have to have that book, we have to have the rights to translate the book. We can't just translate any book we want to. We then have to work with a volunteer translator to actually translate those materials into a language that we're allowed to translate into. And then because they're picture books, we actually need to do some kind of background processing to actually do in-painting of the actual book images, meaning that we actually have to remove the text from those background pictures and those illustrations, because in picture books, the text and the pictures oftentimes carry equal weight. So it's very important that the translations and the original illustrations are shown together. That said, our volunteers help very much with the translating, but the back-end kind of processing of that in-painting, doing some of the assigning, that kind of stuff, that's falling really back still to the team on the ICDL side of things. So that's really kind of where things slow down, because right now there are 4,000 translators to kind of one body currently on our team who does all the processing. So they can translate books faster than we can process them. There are mechanisms that we would like to maybe pursue if resources become available to maybe make some of that more automated. And while we can identify some of those, we realize that as with lots of automated processes, we can probably get ourselves a good portion of the way there, but we still need humans to actually go through and check them. For example, when it comes to this inpainting, removing the text from the books. One of the things we have volunteers do right now, and it's not just volunteer translators, anybody can do it who doesn't necessarily know another language, is we have some automatic techniques for actually identifying the text on a page. And there are lots and lots of those kind of algorithms out there, but they work really well, especially for, text where it's maybe a white background and blocks of text. Well, when you have illustrations that have, bears and flying pigs and purple hippos and all sorts of things in the background, it's much, much harder to identify that text. We also have this text in 61 different languages, so a lot of these algorithms work better at identifying text in certain languages and not so well in others. The other thing is a lot of times in children's book, that text isn't necessarily just a regular Arial or Helvetica font. It may be written very fancifully. It may be written in a giant spiral or upside down or all sorts of things. So we provide a very tough use case for a lot of those automatic algorithms. So while we can do that somewhat, what we've realized works even better for us is our volunteers can go through and we have a little interface where they can actually go through and just draw text boxes. They literally just draw a box around the text to identify where the text is on the screen. Then what we can do is after we know where those regions are, then we can focus our inpainting efforts just on that region of text so that we're not interfering with the rest of the illustration on the page. So that's one thing people can do.
I was going to say, so before we even get into some of the technical things in terms of how you support the volunteers, I was kind of wondering how you build that community of volunteers in the first place, especially since when you talk about the 61 different languages and the 4,000 books, I mean, the incredible reach, the incredible types of different expertise that you're looking for just seems so daunting. So I was wondering about how you managed to build up this body of volunteers in the first place.
Well, we've been very lucky. When we first started, like lots of projects, we really did a lot of reaching out. We happen to be located here in the Washington, D.C. area, so we took advantage of the fact that, one, we are located on a university campus, the University of Maryland, so we took advantage of lots of the international students and international faculty on campus to try to get some of it started. We also reached out to different organizations like local embassies. Where we were looking in particular for groups of people who might be physically, living in a different country than normal, who might be interested in particular in making, children's materials available for their own children. So we kind of started out very much like a lot of groups would, is kind of putting out the words, looking for the feelers, looking for the groups who might be interested, and honestly, it's taken off from there. What we found is that the volunteers that we have who are probably the most active are also probably some of our best advocates. We get lots of volunteers who come in and say, I was referred by Monique from, France because she's so passionate about doing it. Or they'll post it on their blog sites, and all of a sudden I can tell, you get 20 different volunteers from Italy because somebody has, posted something saying, hey, they need people. So we've been very lucky in that sense that once we built up kind of a core group who was very interested in helping us, a lot of the work now has been done by the volunteers themselves in helping get the word out.
Great. And when you talk about referrals, I mean, it makes me think that one of the things that we've been talking about related to this issue is that from a software engineering point of view, some of the metrics that we're used to using change. We're not really talking about system performance being one of the main drivers or the number of features being the main drivers, but we're so interested in things like the energy, the enthusiasm. The more energized you can get your volunteers to be, the more they will do things like refer other people that have similar skills. So I wonder, is that a fair statement? Is that a good way to rephrase some of the things you were just saying there?
That's absolutely fair. If anything else, I would say that, we have some volunteers who, as an example of that, they will actually send me notes saying, I'm going on vacation, so I won't be able to work for you for 2 weeks, even though these are volunteers, because they're so passionate about it, and I think they want to make sure that that, hey, I'm going to have to take a little break here because I'm in another, I'm off doing something else, but I'll be back. Don't forget me.
What you're saying really speaks to not only getting these people involved in the first place, but also keeping up their level of enthusiasm and energy. And I think, for many of us that are working on social networking sites, that's kind of the golden grail, that we're looking after. I wonder if you had a sense about what is it that keeps people so motivated. I mean, is it recognition? Is it altruism? Is it some kind of a self-servingness in a way because they want these books to be available for their children, so they're interested in putting in the time? Do you have any indications there?
I have a feeling it's probably a little bit of all of the above, but I do believe that the altruistic spirit is probably the highest one. Because in terms of the recognition they get, there is a name on a website that's like 2 clicks away. So there's not a lot of recognition, but people are very proud of that. I should say that we do have a fair number of volunteer translators who, while they give of their time to us, are professional translators and will actually use our site on their, as part of their portfolio. So they will link back to it, so they'll look for them. But there seems to be a real pride in getting those translations out. I mean, enough so that when those translations are put out, and we go through a process where we have a volunteer who will actually do the translation, then we work with another volunteer who will actually review a book translation before it's actually published on the site. But that original person who's done that translation oftentimes will come back to us and say, I was doing some research and I think this really should be said a different way. Can we change that? So they really do have some pride, and they want to make sure it's correct. They understand that children around the world are going to read these books. I should also mention that while I said we have professional translators, the other group we have, which seems to be very, very proud of their work and love to see it out there.
A developer in a way. Was it hard to speak the language of the users or the volunteers? I mean, was that a gap that needed to be bridged, or did you not find that to be a problem?
It's something that we've learned as we've gone. I am very lucky to be part of the Human-Computer Interaction Lab, where we may have kind of that technical background, but a lot of what we do is we work with the users to try to understand what those needs are. So we try to blend both human needs with what we believe can be a technical solution. So one of the things that we started off with, we work here at the University of Maryland with a kids team. So when the library interface, for example, was designed, if you look at one of the ways that you can search our library, it's something called Simple Search. It doesn't look like a traditional Google search where you just type in, some keywords. We actually worked with a group of children around ages 7 to 11 to actually design an interface that could be designed by children for children. So it wasn't just going to be a library designed by adults for children than to read books. And then because we wanted to be an international library, we also worked with children in other countries, these kids teams that we call them. So we actually worked with children in Germany, Nicaragua, Chicago, and I'm blanking on what the last one is. Oh, New Zealand. New Zealand. So those 4 countries. And we still, to this day, continue, to deal sometimes with the international issues. To try to make sure that we have an interface that is both not just reflected in terms of language that's available in many different languages, but also we have lots of icons. And while we might represent, for example, maybe a pet as a dog or a cat and think that that's very kind of U.S.-centric or European-centric, is that appropriate for all over the world? Or what does it mean to be funny? We at one point had made an icon of a kid making a funny face with their tongue sticking out. And we found out in other cultures that it's very disrespectful. So we needed to go back and revisit those kind of icons. So when we talk about making an international library, it's not just about the text being available in other languages. It's also about making sure that design is appropriate for other cultures and other languages. That said, like everything, even children's libraries, though, can have political issues. So sometimes we have to kind of pick our stand and take it. For example, we've had some issues with certain countries when we broke down countries where all these different books are from. We have a globe. It's a very simple little globe, but it's a way that younger children we found is a very easy way for them to search. They can just pick, North America, Africa, a different country, and it'll show the books from that continent. While certain countries, like Turkey, was very unhappy, at least parts of Turkey, didn't want to be in Europe, or they didn't want to be in Asia because, again, of which part they were. So we would get lots of email about, you have us in the wrong place. And it was interesting because at that point in time when we were getting those kind of emails, it was when I believe part of Turkey was actually applying to be part of the EU. So because we had them as part of Asia, they were not very happy with us.
Oh, I see.
So what we have tried to do is not to be the one who is making up those, standards, but we early on we chose the standards that we would use. So I believe if I remember. It's been a while, but I'm pretty sure that the standards we were using, actually, we were using the National Geographic standards for where what countries belong to what continents.
Okay.
And again, even that was a trick because we were trying to find an organization that wasn't very political.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And not that everybody agrees, but those issues really do come up. It also comes up periodically that people are upset that we have more languages, maybe from one region than another.
Uh-huh.
And they think that we're being biased. And again, our stance is we'll take books from anywhere around the world. But getting those agreements and those licenses sometimes is hard. But because we are now viewed as an international library, if we, for example, only have books from Palestine, we got some complaints early on because our first books that we had a few books just from Palestine. We had no books from Israel. And there were several complaints there. Now we have some from both. But those kind of issues, even in a children's digital library, do come to play.
Well, I was going to say maybe that there's a hope at least that you could turn some of those issues around and say, well, if we're missing books from Israel, then that points to a need for more volunteers and more people to actually put in the books, as opposed to you being the gatekeeper that's keeping them out. It's more a matter of we need volunteers to help put them in.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons, too, when we do have rights to translate books, it's really wonderful when we can take a book from those countries and also translate it back into several languages. And then some of the great comments that we'll get from kids periodically is when they can read a book from, for example, we have a beautiful, wonderful collection. We have some wonderful partners in Iran, so we have lots and lots of Persian books. And some of those have been translated. And it's wonderful then when kids here who've heard of the country but don't know much about it, they can actually read the stories and say, hey, that's just like a story I know. But until they can see those translations, they can't, connect those dots.
Wonderful. I was going to say, it's a little bit off the subject of some of the things we've been talking about, but one of the things that struck me the most when I was looking at the ICDL was some of the things that are really attuned. There's things in the interface that are designed that way because of children being the users. And one thing that really struck me was that you have one way of selecting the books was by the color of the cover, if I remember right.
Absolutely.
Something that would never have occurred to me as a way to do the searching, but I suppose it's driven by the children being the users there.
It is. So that goes back again to us working with this kids team. So we wanted to design a digital library for children by children, not just for adults. And what we actually did is we worked with the children. The children that we work with actually went to some local bookstores and different places and interviewed other children to find out how they actually searched for books when they were interested. And what we found is that they really remembered things like, the picture or the color of a book when it was a book that they remembered. They might remember that they wanted the book with the purple hippo on the front. So it was really important for them to be able to search by that kind of criteria. We also found one of the other categories that we search by that maybe isn't a traditional adult category is by feeling. It was important for kids to be able to search for that purple hippo book that made them feel happy. So we have both feelings and book colors on our search engine to allow them to be able to make those types of searches.
So I guess the last question I wanted to shoot your way was, is there something important that you wanted to get out that I haven't asked about today?
Let's see. I guess the main thing is, and we're always promoting it, is ICDL is a free resource. It's amazing how many people out there hear about us and think maybe we're a for-pay site or maybe we're just a giant card catalog. We think it's a wonderful resource. We highly encourage people to go visit it. We have, like I mentioned before, about 100,000 unique users a month, so not huge, but those users come from around the world. And it really is a wonderful resource if you're looking for children's literature that you don't see every day, at your local bookstore. So we encourage people to go visit it and hopefully use it and let us know how you're using it.
Great. Well, hopefully, by featuring it here, hopefully we'll get the word out to a few people that might not have heard about it before. I know I have a 10-month-old at home, and I'm just dying for the day he's going to be old enough to start appreciating some of the books there. I'm really looking forward to some of the different cultural things that you have on the site.
Very fun.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for spending the time with us today.
You're very welcome.